Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Franklin D. Roosevelt. At first, when the U.S. had heard about the World War II, the U.S. really tried to stay out of the war by passing neutrality acts. However, Roosevelt tried to change the neutrality acts by repealing the sale of arms toward warring nations. Therefore, Roosevelt created a plan called the Cash and Carry Plan, and they were able to sell arms. But however, whenever they sold arms, they had to go over to the U.S. and obtain it themselves. Churchill of Great Britain asked the United States for 50 American destroyers for military bases in Newfoundland and the Caribbean in a 99-year lease. Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided to pass an act called the Lend-Lease Act. The Lend-Lease Act would provide supplies deemed necessary by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Isolationists really argued that lending items, and they wouldn't really want that back. So, with the Lend-Lease Act being a really bad offer because they're just lending items. And Roosevelt countered with the isolationists by saying that, if someone had a house on fire and it was and you have a fire hose and they don't have a fire hose, you would just give them the fire hose so that they would be able to protect their house. Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided to open the Lend-Lease Act towards Britain. Britain and Franklin D. Roosevelt decided to open up something called the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter was a charter where it set up post-war goals. These goals included no territorial gain from the war and pledging a support of democracy and a permanent system of general security. America and Japan seemed to have a large conflict due to Japan's hunger for expansion. Japan decided to expand, and therefore America was really angered by Japan. Therefore, America created an embargo act on Japan. Japan had made a tripartite pact with Germany and Italy at September 27, 1940. Japan recognized Germany and Italy as a force in Greater Europe and Japan. While Japan was angered by America's embargo act, Japan had attacked America on December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, it was attacked in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japan sent their affiliate planes to demolish American ships, planes, and 2,400 people. Roosevelt said to Congress that U.S. will take revenge and win no matter how long the battle took. Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S., thus starting the U.S.'s involvement in World War I. Pearl Harbor was a very tragic event, very strategic, but it gave more patriotism than sadness.
The U.S. reacted to Pearl Harbor by coming together. Men, women, and children all gathered together to find scraps and materials that could be used towards fighting in the war. The day after the bombings of Pearl Harbor, isolationism basically ended. To fight for the U.S., 10 million men were drafted into the fighting of the war. Another 6 million men and women enlisted into the war. To prepare, the Army, Navy, and Air Force built many bases around the entire world. Back in America, the government helped the economy a lot. They helped set prices for consumer goods. They also negotiated with labor unions. To increase wartime goods, they helped companies switch from producing consumer goods into wartime goods. An example of that would be a car production company would be switched over to a tank and truck producing company. It seemed that the war always needed more produce, so more factories were built in order to support the cause. This led to more jobs being available to the American people. With the majority of the men gone, women were needed in the factory business. They made ships, planes, guns, and did most of the jobs that men could do. It boosted the women's wages along with their confidence. Many believe that if World War II didn't happen, today women wouldn't have the same rights that they do. Rosie the Riveter, it was and still is the symbol of the American working woman. She represented feminism and the female factory worker, proving that women could do everything that men could do, and more. The war also had positive effects for African Americans. The employment rate of skilled African Americans doubled. Also, many enlisted into the war. About 1 million African Americans were fighting in World War II. However, they had to be in their own separate squadrons. One black squadron called the Black Eagles destroyed or injured over 400 enemy aircrafts. Times weren't so great for the Japanese Americans, though. They were forced to sell their homes, land, and businesses and were placed into wartime relocation camps. This was because Americans felt unsafe. They thought that Japanese Americans would act as spies for Japan and ruin any chances they had at winning the war. While America worried about its own homeland, the Japanese seized Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and Singapore, along with a lot of other parts in Asia. The small island country was becoming a very large force. Japan's ally, Germany, held lands from Norway to Greece, and they were slowly destroying the Soviets. They endured what was called the 900-day siege, and this time, 1 million Russians died. Russians, however, were smart about their losses. They destroyed their homes, farms, firearms, and just about everything they owned that could be useful to the German forces.
The Allies won many sea battles versus Japan, like the Battle of Midway and Battle of
Guadalcanal.
Allies won battles in North Africa, then moved toward Italy and made Mussolini surrender. Allies used a secret plan called Operation Overlord.
They sent a fake attack point message overheard by Germany.
The Allies actually attacked in Normandy. It was less defended because Hitler thought there was an attack in Calais because he got the fake message. Allies defended Germany's attack at the Battle of the Bulge. Allies met in Yalta to decide what Germany would have to give up for losing the war. Russia was strong at the time, and the U.S. needed help fighting Japan, so the U.S. couldn't do much about Russia's demands. Russia wanted Poland and surrounding countries to become communists. They allowed them to vote for their government. The vote was decided by whoever had more control over Berlin and Prague. The U.S. let Russia have more control of Berlin and Prague because they didn't want to lose the men trying to take over, the Germans. Churchill thought the U.S. should have pushed into Berlin more than the Russians, because they just fought a tyrant and they didn't want another one to take over. Letting the Russians have Berlin saved U.S. men. The Russians ended up helping the U.S. fight the Japanese.
Okay. The election of 1944, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt ran against Republican Governor Thomas Dewey of New York. He won with 54% of the vote. And during the death of Roosevelt, Americans were especially shocked. They looked up to him as such a great leader that they couldn't remember anyone else as their leader. He ran for 12 years before his life ended. Vice President Harry S. Truman took over after Roosevelt's death. When Roosevelt died, Truman said that he felt as if all the stars, planets, and moon fell on him because he had taken the responsibility of the country into his hands during a time of war. And that is a really big responsibility. Alright, victory was coming close for the Allies, and the country of Germany was collapsing. American troops closed in on Berlin of the West. Soviet troops came from the east. Soon they met in Torgau, south of Berlin, and then they started air raiding the city with bombs. Hitler was hiding in his underground bunker. Unwilling to admit defeat, he decided his own fate with death on April 30, 1945. A week later, Germany surrendered to the Allies. And the following day, the Allies celebrated their long-awaited victory, known as VE Day, Victory in Europe. Island hopping is a deadly routine used by the Americans, where they captured islands under the control of Japan to go around other islands like a stepping stone to get to Japan. The Americans returned to the Philippines under General MacArthur after island hopping. They captured the Philippines capital, Manila, in February 1945. After that, they captured Japanese islands Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And then, they were kamikazes. Those are bomb-filled planes piloted by Japanese, and those Japanese would fly into Allied ships to destroy their enemies and cause a lot of harm.
Late July 1945, the Allied leaders Truman, Churchill, and Stalin met at Potsdam, Germany for the Potsdam Conference. Truman heard American scientists successfully tested a secret new weapon, the atomic bomb. It was heard to be enough to blow up a whole city. The Potsdam Declaration was targeted towards Japan, and they insisted that they should surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan had no idea the atomic bomb existed, so they just ignored it. The Enola Gay was an American bomber. It dropped an atomic bomb on August 6, 1945, on Hiroshima, Japan. It destroyed nearly 80% of the city, while killing nearly 70,000 people. On August 9th, the United States dropped another atomic bomb on Nagasaki. 40,000 residents immediately died. After effects from the bomb's radiation killed even more innocents. The day Japan surrendered to America was on August 14th, 1945, and this was known as Victory over Japan Day. Historians estimate that between 30 and 60 million people were killed in battle or behind the lines. By 1945, millions more were homeless and had no way to earn a living. The Japanese captured the Philippines in 1942, and they forced 60,000 American and Filipino prisoners to march 100 miles without food or water. Nearly 10,000 died or were killed. The Holocaust was a genocide against the Jewish people. Nazis imprisoned Jews from Germany, Poland, and other conquered nations. In these prison camps, more than 6 million Jews were tortured, starved, or murdered. In some death camps like Auschwitz, Majdanek, Dachau, and Treblinka, Allied troops found large gas chambers along with hundreds of thousands of Jews murdered. Battle-hardened veterans wept upon seeing the piles of dead and dying human beings. After the war, the Allies decided to put Axis leaders on trial. From 1945 to 1946, they conducted war crimes trials in Nuremberg, Germany. As a result, 12 Nazi leaders were sentenced to death. Thousands of other Nazis were found guilty of war crimes and also imprisoned. Also, Japanese leaders were executed and tried for war crimes.